Hello, everybody. Welcome into an emergency podcast of the Penn State 365 podcast. I am Dylan Callghan-Croley, beat writer, recruiting analyst at Happy Valley Insider. I'm joined by my co-host here at the Penn State 365 podcast, Anthony Hazan, our resident super fan. Anthony, major news here on Sunday afternoon. Mike Yurcich, after 2 3/4 of a season, is out as Penn State's offensive coordinator. The firing comes just 24 hours after the Nittany Lions' 24-15 loss to the Michigan Wolverines. We haven't been able to recap that game just yet. We're waiting for Marty to be able to do that tonight or on Monday. But this news kind of just jumps that game. Penn State, for the 6th time in the James Franklin era, will be looking for an offensive coordinator, or should I say the 5th time. They'll be looking for a new one. Of course, he had John Donovan in his first few years. Then he had Joe Moorhead. They went in-house with Ricky Ronnie. They then hired Kirk Ciarrocca. And this firing of Yurcich kind of reminds me of that Ciarrocca firing. That season, 2020, Franklin was obviously displeased with the performance of the offense. And it was, quite quickly, Ciarrocca was dismissed kind of out of the blue. We kind of were expecting it to happen, but we weren't sure when it was going to happen. I'm not sure how you felt, but after last night, I said this on the Locked On Nittany Lions podcast during our post-game episode on the field. It felt like last night, one, we don't see James Franklin call out his coordinators like he did in the press conference last night, talking about how they had to call a better game to get Drew in rhythm. We don't see James do that often. So it felt pretty meaningful that he did that. And two, it felt like, I don't know if he was going to get fired after that game or if he was going to get fired this year, but it was definitely something that James Franklin had to start taking a look at Mike Yurcich, the job he was doing, and putting Penn State's offense in a position to succeed. I guess just your initial thoughts. I don't think either one of us are surprised it happened, but we may be surprised that it's happened right now. 24 hours after Michigan. Some people are going to say this feels like a scapegoat move. Perhaps people are going to blame Franklin for, neutralizing Yurcich's creativity. We're never going to know why Yurcich didn't have the creativity for Penn State over this season. But at the end of the day, it wasn't there. It wasn't good enough. And Penn State's 2 biggest games of the season, the offense crawled into a shell and looked terrible. What's your takeaway on initial takeaways on this?
Yeah, like you said, I was a little surprised by the timing of it. Something had to be done. I think everybody knew that something had to be done. I thought maybe it would come after the last game of the season, before the bowl game. But, I guess Franklin, he heard the noise. I'm sure he saw it with his own eyes. He decided that it needed to be done now, and changes needed to start being made. This gives him an opportunity to get a head jump on looking for the next offensive coordinator. I hear what you're saying about some will say this is a scapegoat move. Like some will say, Franklin, he held Yurcich back. He's been the problem all along, and maybe he has been. We'll probably never know. If Franklin is the real problem with, the offense, or if, Yurcich just didn't have what it took to be an offensive coordinator at this level. But, it's clear that something had to be done. And obviously that was recognized by Franklin and probably Pat Kraft as well. Who knows? Maybe he forced a move too here.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the loss yesterday puts Penn State, they're going to go 10-2. I mean, they're going to go 10-2. There's a good chance they end up in a New Year's Six bowl game. They may win that bowl game, but at the end of the day, most fans are going to look at this season as a failure for what it could have been. And a lot of that failure comes back to the offense. I mean, the defense wasn't perfect yesterday against Michigan. It has its faults in that loss. But at the end of the day, the Penn State defense, for the most part, gave Penn State a good chance to win. At the end of the day, Penn State only allowed Michigan to drive the full length of the field twice. They couldn't get off the field on third down, which is absolutely something that needs to be, criticized. But at the end of the day, the defense gave the offense a chance to win that game. The offense had moments, but the consistency was never there. And then in the Ohio State game, it was 10 times. It was somehow 10 times worse of what yesterday was for Penn State. Penn State had no creativity in that game. They couldn't extend drives at all. The offense, the passing offense, has completely disappeared. But I think the most damning thing for Mike Yurcich is, Drew was there was a lot of pressure on Drew to begin with, but the development of Drew this season has not been there. I don't think it's going out on a limb to say that the true freshman version of Drew last year is a better quarterback than the version that we're seeing of him right now. There's been no development for him this season, and that goes back to Mike Yurcich as the quarterbacks coach. And I think James Franklin, he looks at as this was one of Penn State's best chances to get to college football playoffs, if not their best chance to get to the college football playoffs under James Franklin. They have the defense, they had the quarterback, and at the end of the day, the offense couldn't get it done this season. Even in games they've won, they're averaging 35, 40 points per game this season. Even in the games they've put up 30, 40 points a game, it's always been ugly. It's never felt easy. They make it difficult for themselves to score. And I mean, you also look at the running game. The running game has taken a step back. It's still solid, but this was supposed to be the best backfield in the country, and it may not be a top 5 backfield right now in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And that goes back to Yurcich.
You said it insanely well. I mean, there's only been, one, maybe 2 games this year that this Penn State offense looked like it had any sort of flow, any sort of rhythm, any sort of consistency to it. The Maryland game was one that was by far the best the offense looked all year and probably will look all year. And I would say the West Virginia game and the big part of that game 1 might just be because of that 70-yard touchdown. That was the most explosive, best play of the year, and it happened 3 plays into the season. If I would have known that was going to be the most exciting moment of the season, I would have savored it a little more in that moment. But, yeah, other than those 2 games, even in games that they put up 30, 40 points, like you said, the offense, it looks like it's been an effort to score. There hasn't been any moments where it just felt easy and it just flowed. They just moved down the field with consistency and scored. Every drive, every yard, every first down at times has felt like it took them a mile to get there. It's just it just hasn't looked good. Like you said, Drew regressed, or he just hasn't progressed, if anything. He looks timid, and in big games he looks scared. And I think that's been the damning thing for Mike Yurcich, and the reason why he's fired today is in the 2 biggest games of the season, he called a scared game. And Drew looked like a bad quarterback in the 2 most important games of the year. And ultimately, that's not going to get it done.
Yeah, and I think the most we won't know. I don't even say we won't know because under Ricky Ronnie, under Joe Moorhead, Penn State's offense had creativity. It had creativity. It was fine. I don't think James Franklin told Mike Yurcich, hey, take out all the creativity in the offense. There's been no creativity in the offense. And I think, to me, the wide receivers have struggled to get open this year. Yes, and that's a part of talent. That's part of the struggles of recruiting under Taylor Stubblefield. That's part of the developmental issues that this program has undergone over the last 5 years at that wide receiver position. But at the end of the day, part of an OC's job is to create game plans, create plays that help get wide receivers open. There's been no route trees for Penn State. It feels like Penn State is legitimately running, the same 3-4 routes for each guy. I mean, we saw some rub routes in the Maryland game. One of them might result in a long first down. It never felt like Mike Yurcich had a game plan, had plays out there that helped his wide receivers get open, help gain separation. I don't think this is James Franklin deserves to take flack and some of the responsibility for what the offense has been this year. At the end of the day, he's the head coach. He has to tell Yurcich, to do this and that. He can't. No matter how much you trust a guy, you can't go completely hands off as a head coach. That's not how this works. And he's not. I don't think he's not. But Franklin has to take responsibility for the offense to a degree, being as bad as it is. But I mean, at the end of the day, the other thing that I think really stands out is the two biggest games of the season. Mike Yurcich never had a game plan that put his quarterback in a position to win a game.
Nope.
He never allowed Drew to get comfortable against Michigan or against Ohio State, and it's a big reason why they lost. And James Franklin said as much last night in the post-game press conference, saying that they had to work on Drew. Let me find the exact quote, because I should quote this as exact. He said, "We've got to do a better job of calling a game to allow our quarterback to get in a rhythm. That is critical. We've got to find easy completions for the quarterback to get in a rhythm. That's what everybody does. We've got to do a good job of that." Penn State hasn't done a good job of that all season.
That's as blatant as it gets right there.
Yeah. We can probably we can probably discuss why Mike Yurcich failed as Penn State's offensive coordinator this season. And I'm sure we will in the upcoming days. But I think this also offers an early opportunity to start thinking about what lies ahead for Penn State at the offensive coordinator position. Notably, the co-OCs going forward right now are Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell. Those would be two names that people discuss as potential offensive coordinators for Penn State going forward. I'm not sure the Nittany Lions can go internal on this decision or this next hire.
Absolutely not.
They do risk losing a guy like Sider, but I think to a degree at this point, that's a risk you probably have to be worth taking. I think Penn State has built up enough goodwill at the running back position that losing Sider is going to hurt running back recruiting. It will hurt Florida recruiting potentially, but I think also Penn State's done such a good job in Florida during the Sider era that if he were to leave because he's not becoming OC, they have connections down there that they can continue to build on. But no, I'm not sure they can go in-house for this next hire. It feels like this hire is a make-or-break hire for James Franklin and his future at Penn State. Go ahead.
No, it is, without a doubt. I 100% agree with you. They cannot go internal with this hire. You are Penn State. You are one of the top 15 jobs in all of college football, and that includes offensive coordinators. You are a top 15 offensive coordinator destination in college football. Would you disagree with that?
No. This is Penn State's one of the best jobs in all of college football. It's the head coach is one of the best jobs in all of football. If you can go be a good OC at Penn State, it is a direct stepping stone to a head coaching job very quickly. Look at the coordinators under James Franklin outside of Yurcich. Brent Pry ended up with a Power 5 job. His two OCs not counting Shiraka, but his two OCs before Shiraka turned into head coaches. I mean, John Donovan didn't work out, but most of his coordinator hires have worked out for him.
Yes. So I 100% agree. And if you're Penn State, if you're James Franklin here, you have to go out and get an established name. You have to go out and get a guy that is proven at a Power 5 level that he can run a Power 5 offense. Because I agree that this is probably his last offensive coordinator hire at Penn State. Not necessarily because he'll get fired if it doesn't work out, although that's a possibility because considering, they'll probably be like 2-3 years down the line if we're talking another one. He could get fired by that point potentially if it doesn't work out, but mostly because I think he'll leave on his own if it doesn't work out for this guy. So this is his last shot, in my opinion. You have to go get somebody that is going to run a Power 5 offense.
I 100% agree with you. And just again, update from a recruit. And now I will say early signs, it seems like Penn State's commitments right now are pretty okay. They're not going to – it doesn't sound like they're going to lose any commitments right now from firing of Mike Yurcich. We still have we haven't been able to get a hold of Ethan Grunkmeyer yet. That'll be one that everybody's going to be looking at, concerned about. But at the end of the day, I think, like you said, this has to go – Penn State has to look big picture here. They have to look outside the confines of the Lash building. You want to get into some of these names that you and I discussed as potential candidates?
Yeah, man.
We'll start with, I guess, the dream candidates for Penn State, and with the ideal hires, depending on who you ask, you could probably fill in some of these into the ideal dream. And we have other names to know one where you could probably move some guys in there too. But let's start with these dream candidates. And I think these two guys are by far dream candidates. The first one is Washington offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, a guy who grew up in Big Ten country from, I believe, Iowa, has one of the best offenses going in the country out there in Washington, has turned Michael Penix Jr. into a Heisman contender, first-round draft pick. That would be a home run hire for Penn State, but I don't know if they can do it. I don't know if they can pull that off. But I know Ryan Grubb is somebody you're really high on.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's an absolute dream hire. I don't think it's very realistic, however, but we wanted to put it on the list just as a, hey, this is like, you call this guy before you call anybody else and you make him tell you no. And then when he tells you no, most likely you go to the next guy. But, Grubb is absolutely crushing it at Washington right now. Obviously, that offense is incredibly fun to watch. He's got some elite weapons to play with, it helps. But still, they're humming over in Washington right now. And he's probably going to get a lot of head coach consideration in the offseason as well. So that's the biggest reason to me that this isn't very realistic.
For what it's worth, Grubb's salary this year was $1.45 million, and each of the next 2 years he gets a $100,000 bonus, $100,000 increase. So by 2025, his salary is at $1.6 million. If Penn State wants a guy like Ryan Grubb, it's going to take them offering $1.75 to start, if not close to $2 million. That's a lot of money to give an offensive coordinator, especially when you're giving your head coach an already huge amount.
It is, but it'd be worth it for a guy like him. But again, I don't think that's very realistic. That's just a dream name.
Yeah, James Franklin, of course, making over $7 million this year. Moving on from Grubb, another one from out west, a guy Penn State just kind of faced last year, in the Rose Bowl. That is Utah's Andy Ludwig. Ludwig is a guy we saw flirt with Notre Dame last year to be their offensive coordinator before choosing to stick with the Utes. His salary, $1.2 million. This is probably amongst the dream hire for a Penn State fan, but will he make that jump? This is a guy who's from Utah. Most of his coaching career has been on the West Coast. He has spent time at Washington. He spent time at Washington. He spent time at Wisconsin, spent time at Vanderbilt as well. So has been on the East a little bit, but a lot of his coaching history has been on the West Coast. But he is somebody who, despite multiple challenges with Utah, has usually fielded a pretty damn good offense for the Utes.
Yeah, big reason why he's on this list for me, and he's potentially the number one name on this list for me, is because of his flirtation with Notre Dame last year. He was ready to sign that contract. Notre Dame just didn't come to the table and fully complete it. I forget the whole situation with that, but it would have happened if they had if it had gotten done. Ludwig was willing to make that move. And would he be interested in coming to Penn State? I mean, it's like you said, he doesn't have a lot of East Coast connections, so that could be something that holds him back from making that move. But, I mean, he's a name to me that you throw as much money as you can at him and make him tell you no. He's done a tremendous job at Utah under Kyle Whittingham. Those offenses always look good regardless of who's at quarterback. Without Cam Rising this year, he's still been able to put together a competent offense in most games. Obviously, they went down to the wire with Washington last night. Like, to me, Ludwig is just a really good offensive coordinator and a guy that would be tremendous for Penn State and exactly what they needed.
Yeah, I think you put that really well. So those, I think, are two names that Penn State fans overall would be pretty happy with hiring. Again, dream candidates. Now, in our next section of ideal hires, we have four names here. And I think for some fans, these would go into those dream candidates as well, that dream candidate here. So for Penn State, Let's start with one that I think will be on top of everybody's heads. I've gotten texts from friends and family members who are Penn State fans saying, we want this guy. That is someone that Penn State is, very, very familiar with in Kent State head coach Joe Moorhead. Akron head coach. I'm thinking of Kent State because of somebody else who was on our list, which kind of, I think, gives a little bit of a way of who that would be. But Akron head coach Joe Moorhead. It makes sense of why, why Penn State would look back at Joe. James's best seasons came with Joe as the OC. Joe was a great OC for Oregon as well. His head coaching career hasn't worked out at the FBS level, but, I think it's a name to consider.
Yeah. No, without a doubt. Obviously, this offense, James Franklin has had his most success with Joe Moorhead as the offensive coordinator. You can argue with Moorhead if his success was a byproduct of having, a generational running back in Saquon Barkley and having elite weapons with Godwin,
sure,
Gesicki, and Deshaun Hamilton, guys like that. He had plenty of weapons at his disposal, but it's very obvious that Joe Moorhead did a tremendous job here. His offense is fit what Franklin likes to do. And sometimes you got to go back to move forward. So maybe the timing is right. Moorhead's not doing very well at Akron right now. But obviously, Akron's a tough place to win anyway. So.
Does Akron want to move off him? Would he be willing to move off the head coaching job? That's a really interesting, situation for him because I think he went from Oregon OC to. Nobody expected him to take that Akron job, but he wanted to be A, closer to home, I believe, but also B, it's Akron for what it is. It's a stress-free job for the most part.
I think Joe Moorhead makes $620,000 at Akron right now. That's his salary, according to what I Googled. Penn State could easily double that. So, it's not necessarily a downgrade just because you're going from head coach to offensive coordinator. It is a different world in the G5 compared to the Power 5 in terms of salaries. So, it's a move that could make a lot of sense. It's a move that a lot of fans would be very excited for and clamoring for. It interests me. He's in my top 3. But I think there are names that I have ahead of him. But I think it would make a lot of sense for both parties.
Keeping with the people we have in the ideal hire category, again, these could be dream candidates for some people. Let's go to that guy that I was thinking about talking about, Joe Moorhead, former Kent State head coach, now Colorado assistant, former Colorado OC, Sean Lewis. I don't think Lewis is going to be there after this season. He got demoted as the offensive coordinator for the Buffaloes, despite putting together a damn good offense. But, maybe Dion is getting a little ahead of himself here. Sean Lewis makes a lot of sense. A guy who's coached, in the region, great offensive mind, did great things with Colorado, did great things with Kent State. This is a very good this would be a very good hire for Penn State if they choose to go the Sean Lewis direction. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. This is my number 2 name on my personal list. He makes a lot of sense to me, especially since Dion just made no sense with what he did. He had things moving pretty well with the offense under Sean Lewis, especially in the first couple of games of the season. And
they were paying Sean Lewis almost $3 million, too, to be OC.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden they revoke him of his offensive play calling duties, and the offense goes backwards. It just made absolutely no sense. I'm sure it ticked off Sean Lewis. Penn State's an upgrade from Colorado anyway by any metric. So I just think he's an East Coast guy or at least a Midwest guy. So it makes a ton of sense if that's the direction Penn State wants to go. I think it would be a great stepping stone for him to eventually become a head coach regardless. But that's maybe the only thing you could think about is, would he be here more than 2 years? But most coordinators aren't anyway if they work out. But regardless, I think it would be a really, really good hire, and I think he's a really good offensive mind.
Yeah, Lewis originally from Wisconsin, played his actually, I don't know if he's from Wisconsin, but he played his college football in Wisconsin, at Wisconsin. Spent time the high school ranks in Illinois, spent time in Nebraska, Omaha, Akron, Eastern Illinois, Bowling Green, Syracuse, Kent State. Colorado is kind of the exception to the rule for him in his coaching, history of he's spent most of his time in the Midwest. Penn State is in the Midwest, but I mean, it's close enough. And Syracuse, obviously, he has familiarity with the East Coast. That's definitely a name that I think should be at the top of the list for Penn State. Moving off of him, let's stick with a Ohio head coach, current one, to go with the former one. We saw Sean Lewis take a step back, per se, from, Kent State to take the Kent State head coach to take the OC job at Colorado. Could Penn State potentially get somebody like a Jason Candle, head coach at Toledo, to take a step back and become the OC for the Nittany Lions? Jason Candle has been one of those names that you've expected to take another coaching job for quite a few times. It seems like he maybe has missed his chance, but either way, the Rockets are 9-1 this season. They routinely have one of the best offenses in the MAC, one of the best G5 offenses in the country. That remains the same this season. I mean, you look at what they've put up points-wise this year, 28-71, 21-49, 35-41, 13-21, 31-49. Yeah, they have some down games, but he has an offense that routinely during his time at Toledo is scoring 30, 40 points per game. I think this is maybe a long shot hire, but I don't think anybody would have complaints with a Jason Candle hire for Penn State. You'd probably have to, pay him a little bit more than some other guys to take a step down from a head coaching job, but could be one that works out. Again, it's one of those guys probably not here long if it works out. But like you said, for most OCs, they're not going to be here long if things work out anyway.
Yeah, and I think he could follow that Sean Lewis route of, Sean Lewis was the head coach at Kent State, had success, but it is hard at that level to, become a hot name for a bigger job, or at least a Power 5 job. So Sean Lewis decided, I'm going to become an offensive coordinator and see how that goes. Jason Candle could do the same thing if he wants to advance his career off of Toledo. He'll probably get an opportunity at some point regardless. But if he wants to fast track that, it could potentially make sense if Penn State's willing to pay the right price. If he takes an offensive coordinator job at Penn State, and if it works out there, you're fast tracking yourself in maybe 2 years to being a head coach anyway. So it could make sense from that perspective. And if they could pull that off, that's a heck of a hire.
So just to recap some of the names we've gone over so far: Washington offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, Utah offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig. I think we both agree that these are, dream candidates for Penn State. Would be tough to pull. We've also talked about former Penn State offensive coordinator Joe Moorhead, former Kent State head coach, Colorado offensive coordinator, current Colorado assistant Sean Lewis. And we've now talked about Toledo head coach Jason Candle. Let's go to a name that you and me have talked about a little bit over the last couple of minutes before we went live. That is UNLV offensive coordinator Brennan Marion. A name that Penn State fans should be familiar with. He's a name that popped up for the Nittany Lions when it comes to their wide receiver coaching spots over the last few years. But Marion's been the OC at UNLV this year. UNLV under head coach Larry Odom has been great this season. The offense has been averaging over 35 points per game. Marion's a guy whose stock is rising. This could make a lot of sense for the Nittany Lions. His salary right now, I believe, is unknown at UNLV, but just some of Brennan Marion's career, originally from Pennsylvania, attended Greensburg-Salem High School in Greensburg. He coached at William & Mary, coached at Howard. He coached at Hawaii, Pittsburgh, Texas, UNLV. This is a coach who has extensive history in the East Coast in Pennsylvania. a lot of it would make sense from that. He's a very good recruiter, great talent developer. Now, would he come in as just the OC? Would he come in as the OC and wide receivers coach? I mean, Penn State just hired Marcus Higgins a year ago. Are they really ready to move off Marcus Higgins? That would be something to consider in this. But Brendan Marion, I think, is a name that you and me kind of keeps making more and more sense, and somebody that could definitely be on the list for James Franklin.
Yeah, to me, would be a very interesting route to go, just because Marion has done very well at UNLV. I think they're 8-2 right now. They're putting up points. It is UNLV, so it's a little different, but they played some decent teams this year and done pretty well. You know, Wyoming is not a bad team by any stretch, and UNLV put them in the dirt on Friday night. So, you know, Marion has done a tremendous job. Is this his first year at UNLV or his second year?
This is year number 1.
This is year 1. So
he's also their quarterbacks coach.
He's their quarterbacks coach. Interesting. But to me, this could require a little bit of a reshuffling of the deck for the current staff, because you do have him. He has a history of being a really good wide receivers coach. He recruited really well with wide receivers. So if you brought him in, that could potentially have ramifications for Marcus Higgins. So we'd have to see how that would all pan out if that was the case. But he's a very interesting name, and with those Pennsylvania ties, he's a guy that I think probably could get an interview at the very least.
UNLV this year, averaging 36.4 points per game, best for 17th in the country, totaling 423 yards per game. Quarterback Jaden Maeva has completed 65% of his passes this year for 2,000 yards and 11 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, doing that all as a freshman quarterback. Impressive numbers there. Moving next in the ideal hires, last one would be Andy Koltonicki, the Kansas offensive coordinator. Thoughts on Andy Koltonicki, Anthony?
I mean, Kansas has done a tremendous job this year.
Yep.
I mean, Lance Leipold gets a lot of credit, but Koltonicki has called a really good offense. Does Lance Leipold call his own offense? Is he an offensive mind? I probably should know that, but I actually really don't know that.
Lance Leipold, by trade, has been an offensive coordinator, offensive coach in his career, yes.
Okay, so I'm sure Leipold has definitely a hand in calling the offense, but I think Koltonicki is definitely in the names to know category. I think he'd be an interesting hire, especially because Kansas has kind of turned into a high-powered offense, so clearly he's played a part in that. But
Jalen Daniels is one of the best quarterbacks in the country.
Yeah, for sure. So I would definitely put him in the names to know pile. I would not be surprised if he got an interview.
Koltonicki, worth noting, and this will be something worth noting. Koltonicki has spent his entire coaching career since 2013 with Lance Leipold. He's been Lance Leipold's OC at Wisconsin Whitewater, at Buffalo, and now at Kansas. Is his loyalty to Leipold that strong that he's going to stay with Leipold wherever he goes, or is he willing to move off Leipold? That'll be something to watch. But grew up in Minnesota, spent his college days in Wisconsin, has spent a lot of his time in the Midwest, also at Buffalo, of course. So Koltonicki makes sense to a degree there as well. Kansas averaging 32.7 points per game this year, averaged 35.6 last year. Jalen Daniels has been one of the best quarterbacks when healthy, but Jalen Daniels has also been injured quite a bit this year. They've had to go with Jason Bean, who's been pretty good in his absence. And with a backup quarterback, Kansas is still 7-3, averaging over 30 points per game. Has a great tailback in Devin Neal, totaling 425 yards per game. Koltonicki has a has shown great creativity, has shown he's able to do it with not just his star quarterback, but has been able to do it with a backup quarterback as well this year. So that is our last ideal hire. Names to know. Let's start with the clickbait one because that's what everybody wants to hear, right? Now that is Cliff Kingsbury, offensive analyst / quarterback coach at USC. For what it's worth, I don't think this happens, but I think there's also nobody's going to disagree that Cliff isn't a great offensive mind.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I don't.
And is a good quarterback coach.
He is, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's a clickbait name. Why not just throw it in there for some views? But I definitely don't think it happens. I don't think it's very realistic. But you never know. I mean, he's available. He's just chilling. I feel like he's very content to just chill right now. But
yeah, he's getting paid a lot of money just to chill.
He is. He definitely is. I think Arizona is going to be fun cutting him a check for a while if he wants them to be. But, yeah, you never know. I'm sure it could be one that you just reach out, quick a phone call. How you doing? No, I'm not interested. Okay, cool. See you later.
Yeah, pretty much. All right. This next one also a little bit of clickbait, but it's a realistic name. Joe Brady, quarterbacks coach for the Bills, has spent time at Penn State in the past as I believe he was a graduate assistant back then under Joe Moorhead. Went to USC, was obviously LSU was a big part of their 2019 season. Joe Brady is interesting, Anthony, because he went to, he followed Matt Rule to Nebraska or joined – man, I'm all over the place today. He joined Matt Rule at Carolina with the Panthers. And that didn't work out as the offensive coordinator. He lasted just like a season and a half. Now with the Bills as their quarterbacks coach for the last 2 years. And interestingly enough, maybe not his fault, Josh Allen's played the last year and a half hasn't exactly been what we expect of Josh Allen either. That's, I don't think, all on Joe Brady. But Joe Brady's stock over the last couple of years has definitely fallen off from where it was after LSU won the national championship. I think Penn State makes the hire. People are okay with it, but it feels like a kind of a risky hire considering the recent track record.
Yeah, I'm personally not on the Joe Brady train. I know it's a name that has picked up some steam on Twitter. I'm personally not a fan of it. I think if he wanted to be a college offensive coordinator, he would have already done it. I think he's still at Buffalo as the quarterback's coach for a reason. I don't think he has any interest in coaching in college anymore. Some guys just don't want to do it. It's a lot of work compared to an NFL job. I don't think he wants it. But more than that, I think he was a byproduct of just having the greatest offense in college football history at his disposal.
Sure.
The NFL weapons he had at every single position was monumental. And I think it just made his job really easy. I'm sure he's still a quality coach, but at the same time, I don't think he's as good as that season suggests that he is. So personally, I'm off the Joe Brady train.
And I think that's very reasonable. I get why people want Joe Brady because of what that season what happened that season. Now, he was a big part of that because he was the passing game coordinator. He was the wide receivers coach. But like you said, was it a product of just what he had around him? Another one that makes sense because of the ties, Tyler Bowen, former Penn State tight end, former tight ends coach, former Penn State, a guy a lot of people thought Penn State was going to eventually tab to be the next offensive coordinator. He leaves to join Urban Meyer in Jacksonville. That doesn't work out. He's now the OC at Virginia Tech with Brent Pry. Bowen's done a decent job at Virginia Tech with what Virginia Tech has had. It could be a hire, but I think Penn State could do better than Tyler Bowen. I think it would be, like Joe Brady, a pretty risky hire, all things considered. There is familiarity there, but Penn State, James Franklin has to be sure that this next hire is a home run. And I'm not sure Tyler Bowen is a home run. With all these other names to know, the only one that I think you could say, oh, that's a home run, is the one that's the longest shot of them all, in Cliff Kingsbury. But I don't know if Tyler Bowen is a home run hire for Penn State, and I don't know it's one that really inspires confidence in the offense going forward, just because he's done well at Virginia Tech, but he hasn't, I don't think, proven himself as an OC just yet either.
Yeah, no, this was 2-3 years down the road from now. I think Tyler Bowen's name could have a lot more juice behind it.
A longer track record.
Yeah, I think he's done a really good job in is this his second season at Virginia Tech?
Second season. They 19.3 points per game last season. 26 this season. So about a touchdown increase.
Yeah, steady improvement. I think he's done a really good job. I think he's on the right track in terms of, his development as an offensive coordinator. I don't think he's where Penn State would want him to be yet in order to be a legitimate guy for this position. It would kind of feel like a really underwhelming hire to go get Tyler Bowen right now. But he's a guy I think in a couple years, if he keeps it up, he could be a name potentially to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Now, this next one, kind of a guy that we were looking around at some of the top offenses in the country, names to know, just trying to think of outside the box who could be some guys. And we stumbled upon one who is currently at the University of Memphis. That is offensive coordinator Tim Cramsey, who has spent time at University of New Hampshire, spent time at FIU, Montana State, Nevada, Sam Houston State, Marshall, and now Memphis. What makes him a little bit more interesting is Tim Cramsey is an Allentown, Pennsylvania native. He played his high school football at Allentown Central Catholic, led the Vikings to a state championship back in the early 90s. From a Pennsylvania standpoint, which has been a thing for James Franklin in the past, Tim Cramsey could make sense. And it's not like Memphis has a bad offense. 39.7 points per game this year, averaging 452 yards per game. There's a lot of positives there. Now, Ryan Silverfield, their head coach, is a offensive coach by his history, so that is something to consider. But Tim Cramsey, maybe, one of those names to throw down on the bottom of the board as don't be surprised if this name pops up, but I don't think it's the guy Penn State's going to go with again, because I don't think it doesn't feel like it would be a sure thing, though. I think just a fun little notable name, I guess, considering everything.
Yeah, I think it's funny because me and Dylan definitely threw this one in there just because we're both from Allentown, Pennsylvania, or at least from around that area. So we're both Lehigh Valley proud. So
former coach Eddie Mayes, which we're very familiar with as well.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting for us from a personal standpoint, but at the same time, Memphis does have a very good offense, usually year in and year out. I think a lot of that is due to Ryan Silverfield being an offensive-minded coach, and a really good one at that. So that definitely plays a big part in it. But, the Pennsylvania ties are there if Franklin wanted to interview. It wouldn't be a bad interview. I'm not sure, like you said, if it's the direction they should be going, but, it's not a terrible direction if they wanted to at least explore it.
Tim Cramsey's offense last year at Memphis averaged 35.3 points per game. And then he was also the offense coordinator at Marshall under Charles Huff in 2021, where the Thunder and Herd averaged 33 points per game, 456 yards. His quarterback then was Grant Wells. And he was also, I believe, the OC he was the OC there for 4 years, 2018 through 2020. He was a big reason Grant Wells was as big of a name in the transfer portal as he was at the time. But he has an extensive history as an offensive coordinator over the last few years. First 3 years at Marshall were okay, 28, 25, 28 points per game. But since 2021, his last three offenses have averaged 33 plus points per game. So again, I don't think he's a guy to really know, but could be a name worth just noting for down the board. And then the last name we have on here is Kirby Moore at the University of Missouri. Missouri, breaking out this year is one of the best offenses in college football. On track for maybe a 10-2 season. Moore, a former Boise State wide receiver, has had experience under Chris Peterson during Peterson's time at Washington, 2015, 2016, was a part of some good offenses at Fresno State from 2017 to 2022. And now as the OC at Missouri, the Tigers have one of the better offenses in the SEC, averaging 32.8 points per game this year. Quarterback Brady Cook has been fantastic for the most part. This is a name that could make a lot of sense. Young guy, I think only in his 30s, graduated Boise State 2013. So if he was 21, 22 in 2013, he's what, 31, 32 now? Pretty young guy still. Could make a lot of sense here. Now, the only thing worth noting would be doesn't have a lot of ties to the East Coast.
Yeah, I definitely think he's in the names to know category for a reason. It's probably not going to happen, but he's Missouri's cooking right now. I mean, Missouri just absolutely throttled Tennessee. I did not see that coming. I thought that'd be a really competitive game, potentially even like more of a low-scoring game. Now Missouri just ran away with it, put the foot on the throat, and absolutely throttled them. So good for Missouri. I do think that, again, it's a situation where Drinkwitz probably runs his own offense for the most part. He's a great offensive mind. So, especially coming off Yurcich, who came from coaches that were head coaches that were offensive minds. That is something that concerns me. I would want to lean towards Franklin hiring a guy that clearly runs his own offense. Clearly doesn't have a head coach who's already an offensive mind. That to me would be important. But at the same time, you have to be at least somewhat good at offense to, be in.
Well, you gotta call the play. You gotta have an understanding of the game flow and of calling plays.
Exactly. So it's a name worth monitoring, but again, without the ties to the region, I don't think it makes a ton of sense necessarily.
Though, if Penn State's looking to get more involved in the West Coast, a guy who's spent a lot of his time on the West Coast, has connections throughout Washington, Northern California, it could make sense there. Missouri's lowest scoring game this year is 21 points against Georgia, but that game, Missouri had 363 yards of total offense, 151 rushing yards, 212 passing yards. Georgia only had 22 more yards of offense in that game. I mean, this is a guy who called a really good game against one of the best defenses in the country. Something that Penn State probably could have used, twice this season. And then I guess, internally you could look at Sider, you could look at Ty Howell, but like I said, I'm not sure Penn State can really go internally on this hire. They really need to – James Franklin really needs to make sure this hire is a home run. Penn State is right now firmly in that number 3 spot in the Big Ten. Once USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington join, I think, Anthony, we can both agree Oregon probably jumps Penn State right now, right?
Wait, what? I'm sorry. What about Oregon jumping?
When Oregon joins, when the next 4 join.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Oregon becomes the number 3 team in the Big Ten.
More than likely, yes.
They could become 1 or 2, but right now, say they're probably 3. I think Penn State could be number 4 going into next year in the Big Ten.
Yeah,
on paper. But if you're Penn State, you can't afford to take any more steps back. You got to remain in that top 4. If you're in that top 4, you're probably going to have a decent shot at making the college football playoffs any given year. Penn State can't afford to drop back to, that 5th spot on a routine basis. There's going to be years where any of these top programs in the Big Ten outside of Ohio State probably have a down season and miss the playoffs. But if you're Penn State, you can't afford to drop into that 5 spot routinely or lower. And that's why I think this hire is make or break.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Without a doubt. It's only going to get harder from here. You need to have an offense that you can trust to go toe-to-toe with some of these teams, especially USC. We'll see how Washington is moving forward. Oregon's always going to be an offensive team. You need to be able to go toe-to-toe with them.
Yeah, absolutely. To reiterate what I said at the top, early reaching out to recruits, it doesn't sound like the firing is going to hurt a lot of Penn State's recruitment right now. There's it's mostly I liked Coach Yurcich. He was a great guy, but I trust James Franklin. I trust Coach Franklin and his vision, or along those lines, is basically what I'm hearing, which is good for Penn State. It's good for Penn State. Yeah. Any other thoughts, Anthony, on today's firing of Mike Yurcich? I mean, this is this becomes the talking point for the remainder of the year, really, for Penn State.
Yeah. No,
well, Sider and Hal will get their kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, a test run or tryouts over the next couple of weeks. But end of the day, this is now the storyline and focus of Penn State football until the hire is made.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, to summarize, it's a move that had to be done.
Yeah.
Whether or not you believe that Yurcich was the problem or Franklin's the problem, Franklin wasn't getting fired. That wasn't realistic to even consider that. So you have to make the next best move, and that's firing Mike Yurcich, who clearly has had trouble calling a competent offense with flow and consistency. So
it costs Penn State two guys. Yeah. It's amazing because, after last year, I think entering the season, nobody thought Mike Yurcich's job was on the hot seat. But after Ohio State, I think it became a conversation of like Mike Yurcich's job is going to have to be scrutinized over the next year. And then after yesterday, I think there's a lot of thought process that Mike Yurcich is going to be in trouble if I like I said, we didn't think this was going to come today, but if things didn't change fast, he was going to be in trouble. But, James Franklin knows there's a little over a month until the early signing period. Penn State would probably like to get this hire done by then. So this thing should probably move fast, relatively speaking.
Yeah, it should. Again, you made this move now to get ahead of the curve. So
I wouldn't expect anything before the end of the regular season, but that week after Thanksgiving is probably when I would expect. Then we're not going to hear. And let's be honest, we're not going to hear anything. James Franklin, if we learn anything from that wide receivers coaching hire, James Franklin's going to keep this coaching search under wraps very tightly. There may be murmurs here and here that we get, but I'm not expecting to hear a ton on who Penn State's going to hire until they're hired, ultimately. At least that's the feeling I get based off the wide receiver search.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, well, we will be back at it, I'm guessing, tomorrow night to talk Penn State, Michigan. Look ahead to Penn State, Rutgers a little bit, talk about what this season is and hasn't been for Penn State, talk more about Mike Yurcich's departure. But until then, everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast. My name is Dylan Callghan-Croley. He's Anthony Hazan, and we will talk to you